It's time for Tim's Final Confessions. I'm Tim Durling. Thank you for tuning into this episode. This is a review episode of the latest Tesla album. It's called Shock. This has been out for a little while now. Been out for a few weeks, just getting around to doing a review episode. I've been a fan of Tesla since they came out with their second album, Great Radio Controversy. It came out in early '89. I got into them towards the end of the year and followed along ever since. Of course, they were on hiatus for a while, and this is their first new album since Simplicity came out in 2014. And this album's a little bit different for them for a lot of reasons. I'm actually excited, very excited, to be seeing them for the first time in concert this July. They'll be in Moncton opening for Def Leppard. And I'm so excited about this show because, of course, Def Leppard's one of my all-time favorite bands. And these two bands figure in together for quite a few reasons, not least of which is this new album, which I'll get to that if you don't already know. But it's sort of been a mutual admiration society between these two bands all the way back to 1987, 1988. Tesla were one of the bands that opened for Def Leppard on the Hysteria tour, and actually they played at Moncton at the Coliseum. No, yeah, Coliseum in like April of '88. Before Pour Some Sugar on Me really went big, because they weren't playing cities the size of Moncton much after that on that tour, and Tesla were the opening act. And so they've toured together quite a few times since then. Tesla have always made mention of the fact that they're big fans of Def Leppard. I mean, there's even a song on their first album, Mechanical Resonance, called Too Late for Love. It's not the same song, but just to show you how far back it goes. And of course, the big one is 1991 Psychotic Supper. They did a song dedicated to Steve Clark, who had passed away earlier that same year, a song called Song and Emotion, which quotes from quite a few Def Leppard songs. So, like I said, they've always been sort of simpatico. Kind of taken it to a new level with this new album, Shock, and I'll get to showing you the album here. I love this album cover. It's got their classic sort of lightning bolt logo, antenna, whatever you want to call it. It's very old school looking. For the first time in a long time, they're back on Universal, which they were on Geffen for many years, and Geffen distributed, or Universal distributed Geffen, or distributes it now. And so they've got some major label distribution going on. 12-song album. This album was produced and every song co-written by Def Leppard guitarist Phil Collen. And boy, does it ever show. Corey Price messaged me quite a few weeks ago because he's a big Def Leppard, big Tesla fan. Def Leppard fan too, but big Tesla fan, and said, almost too much. And I listened to it. I said, yeah, you know, it's a little bit, and maybe Phil picked this up from Mutt Lange. When you take on a project, it's like it becomes your project. But anyway, there's what the CD itself looks like. And we'll go over inside of the album here. Same lineup as it's been for a long time. They've been fairly intact. Very different from most other bands. I mean, Tommy Skeoch came and went, but they've had Dave Root on guitar now for, I don't know, no, maybe more like 12, 13 years now. So it's been the same solid lineup. Still Jeff Keith on vocals, Frank Hannon on guitar, Brian Weed on bass, and Troy Luccketta on drums. The only difference has been in that second guitar player. Let's get your typical credits inside of here. So I don't think, I've looked, and I know it was produced by Phil Collen. I don't actually think it says produced by anywhere on here, although it must have been. But I do know this. Every song was co-written by Phil Collen. He plays additional guitars on it and sings background vocals, to the point where it almost doesn't sound like Tesla. I mean, Tesla have their own sound, and as far as being influenced by older bands, they're much more of, I don't know, early Aerosmith, maybe Bad Company, much more of a 70s sounding band. So a lot of these songs almost sound like, I don't want to say leftovers, but basically song ideas that Phil would have had presented to Def Leppard that didn't get used. And I'm careful about saying that because it's an enjoyable album to listen to. It's just that there isn't a lot of that Tesla personality there. I mean, there's two guitars. The guitar solos are sort of tamed way down, which is a Def Leppard trademark. Keep it very simple. So to get specific, you know, there's the first single, a song called Taste Like. That's very, very Def Leppard sounding. As a matter of fact, the beginning of it sounds almost identical to the song Nine Lives that they put out in 2008 from Songs from the Sparkle Lounge, the one that featured Tim McGraw. It changes, but when the verse first comes on, it's like, oh, man, this is close. The song called Love is a Fire, the guitar intro to that sounds an awful lot like When Love and Hate Collide. There's just different little things. I mean, you can pick out, Phil Collins' vocals sound an awful lot like Joe Elliott's, so it's just got an overall Def Leppard sound to it. And like I said, I don't think that's to the detriment of the songs. But I will say this, part of my acceptance of this album, my enjoyment of this album, comes from the fact that I'm a fan of both bands. And if I were a Tesla fan and not a Def Leppard fan, I don't think I'd rate this album very highly at all. I don't think I'd like it one bit. As a matter of fact, I have seen some reviews basically stating that. But the fact that I am a Def Leppard fan, it sort of helps. And they're not bad songs. It's just they don't necessarily have that Tesla sound to them. There's one song on here, the ninth song called Tied to the Tracks, is about the only thing on here that to me sounds like it would have appeared on another Tesla album. This is kind of its own thing. I mean, I hope it does well for them. Another thing that's curious is the third song on here, We Can Rule the World. It's a Def Leppard influence, but by extension, the chorus of it really reminds me of Save Me by Queen, which is another great band that I happen to like, so I'm picking up on things like that. I'll show you what the vinyl looks like here. Very, very cool. Hype sticker on it. I miss the days of hype stickers. I'm glad they've come back. Just a single disc vinyl, which makes it more affordable, and I like that. And I don't want to throw anybody off of listening to this album. Just be aware that there's a very big Def Leppard influence on the album. But, I mean, it's obviously Jeff Keith singing. You don't mistake him for anybody else. It's just an interesting turn for them. And who knows? I mean, maybe it'll work. I haven't looked up any set lists yet. I don't know how much of this new album is going to find its way into their set list opening for Def Leppard. Sometimes it kind of feels like it's an overreaching plan. It's like we're putting these two bands together, we're going on tour, and we're really going to make a big statement that this is going to be a fun tour. And I think it will be, actually. I'm very much looking forward to it. So, if you're a fan of both bands, definitely check it out. If you don't like Def Leppard, feel free to check it out. But I would understand if somebody wasn't too partial to it with that information. There are some rockers on here. There's a lot of melodic songs on here. They don't do the slower type songs as well as I think like Def Leppard do. There's songs like Afterlife on here and We Can Rule the World, Forever Loving You. There's not really it's not Tesla's specialty. Their specialty is the up-tempo, sort of really positive type songs. The first song, You Won't Take Me Alive, is really good. The song Shock is interesting because it almost reminds me of when Def Leppard did Slang. They were trying to get a little industrial or experimental sounding. The beginning of it sounds almost identical to Closer by Nine Inch Nails, just for a second, just the way that the program drums come in. The Mission is a cool song. It sounds like a heavier Def Leppard song. It sounds like something that might have appeared on one of their latter-day albums. Definitely a song called I Want Everything. Reminds me of a song from their previous album, the self-titled album called Invincible. So like I said, I'm sure that a lot of these songs started life as ideas that might have made it for Def Leppard, a little bit like, Helix doing She's Too Tough, which Joe Elliott wrote, that sort of thing. But anyway, that's my 2 cents on the new Tesla album, Shock. I'm looking forward to seeing them opening for Def Leppard, and there will definitely be an episode covering that as best I can. So thank you for watching this edition of Tim's Final Confessions.